They say the desert keeps its own secrets, and most of them you only hear after dark. I'm 48, single by habit more than choice, and I live alone on a spread of scrubland outside Fort Stockton, Texas. Nights out here are a choir of cicadas and the soft grind of wind through mesquite. That evening, the wind had teeth. Lightning was walking the horizon like a restless giant, and thunder rolled low enough to rattle the glass in my kitchen window. I'd just killed the porch light and was halfway to the bedroom when the sky tore open. That's how it looked, like a rip, bright and violent, with a blossom of white that burned blue at the edges. It wasn't lightning. Lightning cracks and is gone. This hung there, a fist of daylight clenched above the desert, and then a streak peeled away from it, hissing downward so fast the night couldn't keep up. A heartbeat later, the ground trembled. In the distance, past my north fence line, something hit hard. I've never been the kind to call someone else for things that happen on my land. I grabbed my boots, my old Marine-issue flashlight, and the 30-30 I keep by the door, more out of respect for rattlers than trouble. The storm was moving east, leaving a bruised sky and the smell of hot rain. My F-150 coughed once, then settled, headlamps carving tunnels through the dust the wind kicked up. There's a wash that runs like a cracked vein across my property. The strike had to be near it. Even with the storm drifting off, a glow hung there like a campfire that didn't know it was supposed to flicker. As I rolled closer, I killed the engine. The quiet came rushing back, wind, a distant coyote, my own breath loud in my ears. The glow was behind a low rise. I walked the last 100 yards. Heat hit first, the kind you feel on your gums. Then the smell, electric, metallic, almost sweet, like a penny held too long in a sweaty hand. Beyond the rise, something had chewed a trench through the sand and rocks, spraying them out in a neat half-moon. At the end of that trench sat a craft. I don't have a better word. It was the size of a stock tank, smooth, not chrome, not steel, some color that refused to choose between gray and pearl. No seams, no rivets, no markings I could read. And there was someone, something beside it, crumpled in the sand. I froze. My mind tried to make it a person, a pilot in a strange suit, a mannequin left behind by a movie crew, anything at all that would let the world stay normal. But the truth doesn't ask permission. The shape on the ground shifted, drew a breath you could hear, thin and whistling. I felt the hair on my arms stand up under the damp of the storm. I remember thinking, if this is a person, they're dying. If it's not a person, it's still dying. The part of me that has rebuilt engines and handset bones after bar fights didn't need philosophy. It needed to move. "Hey," I said, voice too loud in the open. "Hey, you okay?" The head turned. The face, if that's the right name, caught my flashlight and returned it in a milky sheen, as if skin and light had met halfway. The eyes were large, not black but layered, like oil on water. A mouth, narrow, trembled open. What came out wasn't a word, more like a cord plucked on a wire inside my skull. It startled me so bad I nearly dropped the rifle. "Okay," I said softer, as if talking to a spooked horse. "Okay, I got you." Training from a lifetime of fix what's broken took over. I slung the rifle, slid my arms under the body, lighter than it looked, and stood. Heat bled through what I took to be some kind of fabric. The craft hummed behind us, a sound you feel in your teeth. I didn't look at it again. The desert in every direction was swallowed by night, and I understood with a plain, practical certainty, out here there was nobody else. Whatever this was, it was mine to carry. Back at the truck, I eased the figure onto the bench seat and threw an old canvas tarp over the dash to kill the glare. The eyes watched me, not afraid, curious, alert. When I climbed in, the weight shifted toward me. It made a small sound, a breath caught and released, and my name, though I hadn't given it, settled into the cab like a whisper. John. I gripped the wheel harder than I had to. "You heard that," I told myself, "because you want to, because you're tired." The engine turned over. We crept home. My place is a one-story rancher with a metal roof that sings in hail. I backed up to the barn and carried the stranger inside to the tack room where it's warm and clean. The storm had worn itself to a low grumble, rain ticking on corrugated steel. I set the figure on a canvas cot and took stock. Shallow breathing, a pulsing at the throat like a swift heartbeat, no blood, at least none that looked like mine. I found an old canteen and lifted it. The mouth opened obediently. The water vanished with a soft, steady swallow. "Paz," it said. Not a chord, not a thought, a word, clear as my own. I stepped back, shoulders pressed to the wall. In the dust and leather smell of that little room, with rain pacing the roof and lightning muttering far away, the world drew a new border inside me. Outside was everything I thought I knew. Inside was this, a stranger not of earth, lying on my cot, speaking a word I'd learned at church in El Paso when my mother went through her Spanish hymns phase. "Peace," I answered before I could stop myself. The eyes closed, then opened, brighter. The room seemed to warm by a few degrees. Somewhere in the rafters, a barn owl called once and fell silent. I didn't sleep. I sat on a stool with my rifle across my knees, not to point, just to hold. Every so often, the stranger's chest rose and fell, and a faint light, like moonlight buried under skin, breathed with it. It occurred to me I had crossed my property line into something a man can't map, and that was the first night. The night the sky split, and I carried home what fell out of it. I woke to the sound of rain easing off the roof and the feeling that the night hadn't really ended. The air inside the barn was warm, heavy with hay and iron and something new, something faintly electric. For a moment I hoped I'd dreamed the whole thing. The crash, the light, the figure lying on my cot. But when I turned my head, the tarp I'd laid over it had slipped halfway down. It was still there. The creature, if I can even call it that, was sitting up motionless, watching the rain trickle through a crack in the wood. The skin looked softer in daylight, almost human at a glance, except it wasn't any color I'd seen before. It shifted between tones like fog catching sunlight, silver 1 second, pale amber the next. No nose, just faint ridges, and a mouth that was little more than a suggestion of one. When it noticed me awake, its eyes, wide and shimmering, fixed on mine. I swear I felt it looking through me, not at me, not in a cruel way, but like it was reading something old, written under my ribs. "You," I began, voice dry, "you understand me." It tilted its head, slow, curious. Then its lips parted, and it made a sound. It wasn't speech, not exactly. It was like music without instruments, a note that seemed to hum in my bones. My flashlight, lying dead on the table, flickered once. I muttered, "Lord, have mercy." The thing blinked. Its mouth moved again, slower this time, searching. Then, as if pulling something from the air itself, it formed a word. "Paz." The Zed hissed faintly, but I understood it. Peace. The same word it had said last night. That broke something open in me. I set the rifle aside and took one cautious step forward. You're hurt." I gestured to its side where the fabric, or whatever it wore, was scorched. There was no blood, but underneath, the skin pulsed faintly with light. Its eyes softened, and yes, they could soften somehow, and then I heard another sound, not in the air, in my mind, no pain. I froze. I hadn't heard it with my ears, but the meaning was clear. The words came as feelings, not grammar. I could almost taste them, calm, gentle, patient. I whispered, "You can talk inside my head?" It nodded once, the movement graceful, deliberate. Then it looked down at the water bucket beside the cot, lifted its hand, long, jointed, translucent, and passed it above the rim. The water rippled without being touched. The bucket trembled slightly, like metal remembering thunder. Then, as I watched, The surface stilled again. Energy, it said aloud this time, the voice small but steady. Life. It was the first full English word I heard it say. I sat down slowly on the hay bale opposite. Every part of me screamed that this was impossible, that I needed to call someone, the sheriff, NASA, anybody. But another part, quieter and deeper, told me not to. Not yet. "What are you?" I asked. The creature didn't answer at first. Its eyes closed, and suddenly the air seemed to thicken. Then, like a slide projector flashing on behind my eyes, I saw something. Mountains not from Earth, towers of glass and light, oceans that glowed from within. And among it all, beings like this one, peaceful, unhurried, tending to something that shimmered like gold mist. Then, without warning, another image appeared. A man in white robes, barefoot, surrounded by a radiant light that felt familiar down to my marrow. Jesus, the name pulsed through me before I even thought it. The being opened its eyes again as if hearing my thought and said softly, "Yes." That one word hit me harder than thunder. I felt my pulse hammering. You know him?" It tilted its head again, not quite smiling, but radiating something that felt like kindness. "Every world knows him," it said, broken English woven with thought. "One love, one light." My mouth went dry. "You mean he?" It didn't let me finish. Its hand rose, glowing faintly, and for a moment the whole room felt warm, not hot, but alive. I felt something expand inside my chest, like the first breath after years underwater. My fear drained out, replaced by awe so heavy it made my knees weak. Then just as quickly it lowered its hand and the warmth faded. The creature's breathing grew shallow again. "Rest," it murmured. "Soon. Go." I leaned closer. "Go where?" But its eyes closed, light dimming beneath the skin. I stayed there, staring, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The cross on the barn wall, left there by my mother years ago, caught the faint morning sun. I looked from it to the being and back again. For the first time in my life, I wondered if heaven was bigger than I'd ever been told. That morning, as the last of the rain left the desert steaming, I realized something simple and terrifying. Whatever had fallen from the sky wasn't a threat. It was a message. By the next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the desert scrub glinting with dew under a rising sun. From my porch, everything looked ordinary again. The same stretch of ochre sand, the same stubborn mesquite trees. But nothing inside me was ordinary anymore. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, or it, lying there in my tack room, light beating faintly beneath translucent skin, like the heartbeat of another world. I brewed coffee I never drank. My hands shook too much to hold the mug. I tried to reason it out the way a practical man does. Maybe I'd gone crazy. Maybe a lightning strike scrambled my brain. But every time I opened that barn door, the truth sat waiting, calm, breathing, impossibly real. The being was awake again, sitting upright, watching sunlight pour through the slats. It blinked slowly, head tilting as if studying the particles of dust glowing in the air. When it turned those eyes on me, I felt the same jolt as before. A kind of silent pull, not threatening but ancient, as if it recognized something in me I didn't even know existed. I swallowed hard. "You're real," I muttered, as though saying it out loud could make sense of it. The being's lips parted. "Real," it echoed, voice soft, almost musical. Then a pause, and again that strange inside my skull resonance. "You fear." The words weren't judgmental, they were compassionate, like someone describing a wound they'd seen 1,000 times. "I don't know what you are," I whispered, "and I don't know why you said that name." "Jesus," At the sound of it, a faint light flared under its skin, brighter than before, pulsing in rhythm with its slow breaths. Then I saw it, not with my eyes, but in my mind. A flood of images, sharp and silent. A desert not my own, skies burning with two suns. A crowd of beings gathered around a man exactly like us, his hands glowing, touching one of them gently on the face. The same peace that surrounded him in every painting my mother used to keep above her bed. The scene shifted. He was teaching, healing, blessing. The faces around him weren't human, but their eyes were filled with love. The same love I'd read about, prayed for, doubted, and forgotten. The vision ended as suddenly as it began, leaving me shaking, sweating, gasping for air. "Stop!" I choked. "Stop!" The being's glow dimmed, its gaze lowered, as if ashamed. "Not hurt," it whispered. "Show truth." I dropped to my knees right there in the straw. "That can't be true," I said, voice cracking. "He came here. He died here for us." It looked up, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like sorrow cross its face. "Everywhere," it said slowly, searching for the words. "Everywhere he is. One Father, one love, one creation." My breath caught. The words pressed down on me like a mountain. "You're saying," I managed, "that the Son of God went to your world too?" The creature didn't answer with words this time. It simply nodded, and then reached toward me. Instinct made me flinch, but its hand didn't touch me. Instead, warmth spread through the air, through my chest, into the place where fear had lived since I was a boy. And for the briefest second, everything, every doubt, every loss, every lonely night felt like it was being rewritten in a language of peace. Then the warmth faded. The creature slumped, exhausted, light dimming again. I realized whatever it was doing to reach me cost it something. I stayed kneeling, hands trembling, heart hammering. I wanted to believe, but belief, I realized, isn't born in churches. It's born in the spaces where your world collapses and you're forced to rebuild it with whatever truth is left. I stared at the being, at this fragile thing from beyond the stars, and all I could think was that maybe heaven wasn't somewhere above us at all. Maybe it was all around us, in everything that lived, breathed, and reached for light. When I finally stood, the being opened its eyes again. "Fear less," it whispered. "Listen more." And then it smiled. Faint, human, heartbreaking. I turned toward the barn door, the morning sun cutting through the slats like golden spears. Somewhere out there, beyond that blue Texas sky, was a truth too big for one planet, and I had just seen its reflection breathing on a cot in my barn. By afternoon, the sky went glass clear, the kind of sharp Texas blue that makes distances look like lies. Heat shimmered over the scrub, and the world hummed like a cicada's throat. I carried a fan into the barn and set it low, careful not to startle the being on the cot. It watched me with steady eyes, the inner light faint but present, like embers under ash. "You saved me," it said, halting English, each word chosen like a tool from a box. "Now I tell you why I came." I pulled up the old milking stool and sat close enough to hear its breath. "I'm listening." It didn't move at first. The silence stretched until the barn itself seemed to lean in. Then I felt it, a tide pushing across my mind, not rough, not invasive, just insistent. Images unfurled, not visions this time, but memories with edges. A craft departing a world of pale seas, a chamber full of quiet singing, no mouths moving, and yet every note anchored in love. A circle of elders, tall, luminous, robed in garments like spun mist, tracing constellations in the air and calling them by names that felt both new and ancient. At the center, a mark, a cross formed by 4 rays, each pointing to a different star. "Witness," the being whispered. "We are witness." "Witness to what?" I asked, already afraid I knew. "To love," it said simply. To the one you call Father, to the Word. It paused, listening for language. The Son. We watch. We learn. We remember for those who forget. Why come here? It turned its head toward the thin light slashing through the boards. Your world loud, it said. Fast. Bright. But hearts. Heavy. Many forget. Many hurt. Its eyes found mine again. We go where pain grows like shadow, to tell shadow not final. My chest tightened. You mean evangelizing? Missionary work? It tasted the words. Mission, yes, but not to make you us, to show you, you. I tried to laugh and couldn't. That's the most alien thing you've said, I admitted, and the most human. The being lifted its hand, and the air warmed, not hot, alive. The barn smell of leather, oil, and hay deepened, as if someone turned up the color of existence a notch. On many worlds, it said, we have word for him, none complete, yours, Jesus, closest to your mouth and heart. It hovered over its own chest. We know him by the way light moves through sorrow. The phrase knocked the wind from me. Moves through sorrow, I repeated, like I could catch its meaning in my hands. It nodded. Where suffering is, he comes, not always body, not always name, always presence, always surrender that makes power new. But here, I said, he came as a man, he died. I swallowed, rose. Yes, the being said, with a tenderness I wasn't ready for. Your story sharp like thorn and sweet like spring water, beautiful as first fire, true for you, true for many. On other worlds, the telling is different. It touched its temple. But the center the same. Love kneels, love heals, love empties itself and fills all things. I stared at the worn floorboards, at the knife-scratched initials from a past life. J.M. I remembered the day I carved them with my father's dull pocket knife, the sting in my thumb when the blade slipped, the way Dad laughed and bandaged it with his bandana. If what you're saying is true, I whispered, then the story's bigger than any church I've ever known. Bigger than any sky, it said. We sat with that a long minute. Outside, a hawk cried, and the sound felt like it traveled farther than sound should. How did you find me? I asked finally. Of all the people in West Texas, why crash in my back 40? Its eyes brightened a fraction. Humor. Not crash, it said. Almost smug. Land. Hard. Then, softer. We listen for hunger. Not stomach. It touched my chest, didn't touch, hovered. Here. I should have argued. I should have denied the hollow the years had dug through me, the lost marriage, the night shift loneliness, the prayers that bounced off ceilings and fell like dead birds at my feet. Instead, I felt seen in a way that was both mercy and ache. You came to tell me Jesus is bigger than I think, I said. That love isn't confined to one planet. It considered. I came to tell you, you are not alone. Not in cosmos, not in grief, not in doubt. Its gaze softened, and I came to ask a favor. Something in my ribs went cold. What kind of favor? The being looked toward the north fence line, where the land gave way to distance. My craft sleeps, it said. I cannot wake it alone, need field, need quiet, need trust. You want me to take you back there? Yes, it said, a flicker of worry crossing its face. My first hint that fear lived in it too. But more, when I go, you keep this. It motioned to a small pouch at its side, more cloud than fabric. From it, it drew something that looked like a shard of sky, a blue crystal, the size of a river stone, pulsing soft as a heartbeat. I held out my hand. The crystal was lighter than glass, warmer than bone. The moment it touched me, a memory not my own rushed up, me standing on a shore beneath 2 moons, a wind like prayer on my face, a presence so tender my eyes burned. I blinked hard, the barn snapping back into place. What is it? I asked hoarsely. A remembering, it said. When you doubt, hold it. When others laugh, hold it. When you are asked to love beyond your strength, hold it. It paused. It will not prove. It will steady. We both looked at the cross my mother had hung years ago above the tool cabinet. The being took it in, head tilted, wonder plain as sunrise. Many shapes, it said. One truth. I slid the crystal into my shirt pocket and patted it like you might settle a nervous heart. All right, I said. We'll try, tonight when the heat drops. The being let out a long breath, almost a sigh of relief. Thank you, John. Hearing my name in that voice did something to me I can't name. I stood, suddenly aware of how small the barn was for truths this large. If we're doing this, I said, forcing a grin, I halfway meant, you're going to have to teach me how to start a starship. It blinked. It does not start with hands, it said, mischief warming the words. It starts with faith. Of course it does, I muttered, smiling despite myself. The sun moved, the shadows shifted, and the day thinned toward evening. Somewhere between then and dark, I realized the secret I'd been given wasn't just about what lay beyond the sky. It was about what lay inside a man who had decided he was finished with hope. And as the first stars needled through the blue, I understood the favor cut both ways. I would help it go home. And it had already begun to bring me there. Evening came down in slow layers, purple on blue, heat loosening its grip on the land. I parked the truck behind the barn so the headlights wouldn't spill over the north fence. The being, lighter than a sack of feed, warm as a living ember, rested against my shoulder as we walked. Every dozen steps it'd pause, listening as if the desert was speaking in a frequency I couldn't hear. Quiet, it murmured. Good. Umbead, the wash cut a dark seam across my property, the same gully where I'd first found the trench. The sky above it gathered stars like spilled salt. I guided us over mesquite roots and around a scatter of rocks, the old 30-30 bouncing lightly against my back, useless and comforting at once. When we crested the low rise, I smelled that same metallic sweetness, and there it was, the craft, half buried, a dull pearl-grey curve asleep in the sand. It wasn't dead, it was waiting. The being straightened, breath steadying. Here, it said, voice firmer. It raised its hand, palm hovering over the hull. A faint vibration ran through the ground, the kind you feel more in your knees than your ears. Dust lifted in gentle spirals. The hull drank the starlight and returned it as the faintest sheen. What do you need me to do? I asked. It glanced at my chest, the crystal in my pocket warming like a small cup of tea. Stand, it said. Believe. Then, after a beat with a glint of humor, and press. A seam I hadn't seen seconds earlier rippled open where its hand hovered, a narrow oval no bigger than a saddle blanket. Inside, no wires, no switches, just a cradle shaped like an idea of weightlessness. The being motioned me closer and pointed at a shallow bowl the size of my palm inset beside the opening. Hand, it said. I hesitated. Then I set my right hand into the bowl. It held a coolness that felt older than winter. The instant my skin touched, the crystal over my heart pulsed and the bowl brightened, first pale blue, then a color I do not have a name for, like dawn remembered by a child. The hull answered with a tone, low and clear, and a cascade of soft lights moved along its skin like fish under moonlit water. What is this? I whispered. Recognition, it said, not of blood, of will. I nearly laughed. My will starts tractors, not starships. The being's eyes softened. Same fire, different sky. Something unclenched in me. I pressed my hand deeper. The tone shifted upward, then upward again, until it became a chord that seemed to tune the dark itself. Mesquite leaves shivered without wind. The coyotes far off went quiet. I felt the tug of griefs I'd carried for years, and felt shockingly how lightly they could rest if I let them. The being stepped into the opening and leaned back in the cradle. Light gathered beneath its skin, steady and sure. "Listen, John," it said, words threading both air and mind. "When I leave, you will think the story is over. It is not. A seed falls silent before it speaks in green." I nodded, throat tight. "I don't know how to talk about this to anyone." "You do not need to convince," it said. "You need only witness. What love did for you, do for one." It looked past me at the horizon. One becomes many. A soft click sounded like a lock yielding. The craft hummed, a purer version of the note from the bowl. Then the desert answered. I swear it did. The ground's quiet lifted into harmony, the low, living tone of stone, the faint, wetted copper of the soil, even the old barn boards behind us adding their weary baritone. It felt absurd to think it, but the whole place was singing. The being turned its face to the sky, that inner light brightening, and for a breath, I didn't see an alien at all. I saw something like a pilgrim at the end of a long road, shoes dusty, eyes full. He is everywhere, it said, soft as prayer. Not to conquer, but to kindle. A wind slid over the ridge, cool and carrying the after-scent of rain. I thought of my mother's cross in the barn. I thought of how small I had made heaven, how practical I'd been with my miracles, how stingy with my hope. What if I fail at this? I asked, at being different than I was yesterday. The being's answer came as warmth in my chest, steadier than the crystal's pulse. "Failure is a language fear teaches," it said gently. "Love does not speak it. Love speaks. Try again." We both looked at the oval of dark behind the opening. The interior wasn't a room. It was a presence of space itself, curved and intimate, as if distance had been taught to cradle. The being laid its long fingers over mine, where my hand still rested in the bowl. The contact wasn't skin, it was meaning. "Dawn," it said. "When light returns, I go. There is time for one more thing." I swallowed. "What?" It gestured to the wash, to the ragged edge of the trench, to the night stitched by stars. "Give thanks," it said simply. "Not because I leave, because you stayed." So we stood there, a rancher with dust in his boots and a creature from another sky, saying nothing, thanking everything. The chord faded to a heartbeat's hush. Coyotes resumed their gossip. Crickets stitched the dark back together. On the walk home, the crystal in my pocket cooled, then steadied into a quiet thrum that matched my pulse. The being moved with less effort, as if earth and craft had negotiated a truce in its favor. At the barn door, it paused, meeting my eyes with a tenderness I'll carry to my last breath. "Tomorrow," it said, and then, "Remember." "I will," I answered, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. That night, I lay awake on the couch, the cross faint in the hallway, the desert breathing beyond the windows. I didn't ask for proof. I asked for courage. Somewhere before dawn, I finally slept, one hand over my chest, the crystal's quiet light warming my palm like the promise of morning. Dawn arrived like it remembered me. A thin grey bled over the desert, and the mesquite threw long, careful shadows across the yard. I woke on the couch, with my right hand still over my chest, the crystal warm against my palm, as if it had kept watch while I slept. The house was so quiet, I could hear the clock tick on the kitchen wall and the dry whisper of sand moving under the door. I stepped outside. The air held that first cup cool you only get for a few minutes before the day chooses heat. The sky to the east was the color of watered milk, a promise of blue. In the barn, the tack room smelled of leather and dust and something sweeter, like rain translated into light. The being sat on the edge of the cot, shoulders squared, eyes clear. The inner glow had ripened, steady now, not flickering, as if the night had been a charger and the craft a waiting current. "It is time," it said. No hesitation, no ceremony, just truth, clean and sharp. I nodded and tried to answer without my voice cracking. You need a ride. We said nothing on the walk to the wash. The world said enough. A horned lark sent a single glass bead of a note into the pale sky. Far off, cattle knocked heads like old friends. Even my boots sounded gentler, as if the ground had softened for us. When we reached the rise, the craft was there exactly as we'd left it, half-buried, patient, ready. The being stopped at the lip of the trench and closed its eyes. When it opened them again, the pupils had narrowed to a thin, luminous ring. Listen, it breathed. At first I heard only the hush of morning. Then, like a picture coming into focus, the hum grew, faint, pure, a tone that matched the beat in my wrist. The bowl beside the opening waited for my hand, like a question I was finally ready to answer. I pressed my palm into it. The crystal in my pocket answered, a quiet warmth expanding through my chest, as if the heart had discovered a second purpose. Light flowered along the hull in overlapping petals. The oval mouth unsealed with the soft sigh of seals releasing, and the interior brightened a shade that reminded me of my mother's kitchen when biscuits came out of the oven and she laughed for no reason at all. John, the being said, and the sound of my name felt like a benediction. Remember not to prove, to love. Always, I said, hoping my voice could carry what my bones already knew. It reached out a hand, those long, translucent fingers, and hovered them a breath above my temple. No touch, only presence. The world shifted a degree, like a compass needle clicking true. In a single inhalation, I saw it all again, but different. The man in white among stars, not my own. The way sorrow bent toward him, the way grass bends toward light after rain, the way fear, named softly, loses its grip. The vision eased, gentle as a tide sliding off sand. Thank you, I whispered, because hope needs manners. The being stepped into the cradle. The hull sang a note I felt in my teeth, then another that rose until the sky itself seemed to thin. Dust lifted from the trench and hung like gold thread. The oval sealed, the craft trembled the way a horse trembles before it runs. Then the extraordinary happened. Not a roar or a flash, but a yielding. The craft didn't conquer gravity, it persuaded it. The hull blurred, not with speed, but with consent. The earth let go. The craft rose without fuss, without wind, just a widening ring of quiet rolling out over the wash, and the desert answered. Every living thing around us tuned to the note. Crickets fell silent, then resumed in a new key. A hawk wheeled once and held steady as if riding the voice of the ship. The mesquite leaves shimmered as if the hum ran along their veins. Even the scar in the sand, fresh, raw, seemed to soften at the edges. I realized I was crying and for once didn't apologize to myself for it. The craft lifted to the height of my barn roof and paused. A thin band of light traced itself around the hull like a halo that had somewhere urgent to be. In my pocket, the crystal brightened, not hot, not bright enough to hurt, just the warmth of a hand finding yours in a crowded room. Goodbye, I said, but the word felt wrong. Endings are blunt, this was a hinge. The band of light narrowed to a point. A new sound entered the morning, so soft it could have been imagined, the soft click of a lock meeting its perfect key. The craft tilted, not toward the sky, but toward the east, toward the light lifting over the plains. It became brightness, then intention, then nothing my eyes could name. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, pregnant with breath I didn't know I'd been holding my whole life. I stood there with my hand over my pocket and watched the space where the sky had learned a new way to be. The sun pushed itself over the rim of the world and poured honey down the wash. Coyotes sang their short morning hymn. Somewhere behind me, the kitchen clock ticked and didn't matter. On the walk back, every small thing was huge. The way the sand took my boot print and kept it, the way a spider repaired its web as if that were the most important work on earth, the way my pulse and the crystal's thrum had agreed on a common rhythm. I entered the barn, looked up at my mother's cross and understood, at last, something she'd tried to tell me when I was 12 and angry and wanted the world to be as small as my hurt. Heaven isn't far, it is near and wide and busy. I set the rifle in its rack and poured coffee that finally tasted like morning. When the cup warmed my hands, I knew what the being had meant by witness. Not sermons, not arguments, presence. Kindness where none is owed. Patience where it's thinner than paper. Love that shows up and stays, even when dawn is late and the desert seems like it's keeping all the secrets. I took the crystal out and held it to the light. It didn't glow. It didn't need to. It simply steadied me, like a hand on the small of your back when the crowd surges and you might otherwise lose your way. And in that small steadiness I realized my faith hadn't been replaced. It had been enlarged. The first person I told was the one least likely to believe me, Earl, who runs the feed store and knows every story I've told since the Marines knocked the shine off me. He'd once said I was honest to a fault and twice as stubborn, which is the kind of compliment a West Texas man gives another when he doesn't want to use the word friend. We stood by the cracked soda machine, late afternoon sun flattening the world to hard edges. I told it straight, the light, the trench, the being in my barn, the way the ship persuaded the sky. I left nothing out, not even the part about Jesus. When I finished, Earl broke the silence with a slow pull on his toothpick and a look that could have been pity or could have been patience running thin. Been drinking, John? No. Head hit anything? No. He studied me a blink longer, then shrugged. You want the red mineral or the white? That was the whole verdict. No smirk, no sermon, just a pivot back to salt for cattle. I bought both because somehow the normalcy was a kind of mercy. On the drive home, the crystal in my pocket throbbed once, like a heartbeat sympathetically embarrassed for me, and then settled again. I tried the sheriff next. He listened in the way lawmen listen when you might be reporting a crime, but might be reporting yourself. He asked if I wanted to file a statement. I told him I didn't think the penal code had a section for pilgrim from another star borrowed my gully. He recommended a checkup at County Health to be safe and gave me a card for a counselor who specializes in trauma. I took both because pride is not the same as wisdom. Word bled out anyway. West Texas has more miles than secrets. A blogger from Midland messaged me asking for photographs. A UFO forum found my old Marine photo and promoted me from rancher to trained military observer, which earned me both credibility points and a thread titled Government Plant. In the grocery line, a woman I didn't know touched my elbow and asked if I'd seen angels. At the diner, 2 kids asked for a selfie. At the post office, a man made the sign of the cross like I was a weather event. The ridicule, when it came, arrived like stickers in a field. You don't notice them until you step wrong. A local radio host called me Barnyard Galileo. Somebody photoshopped a picture of me holding a blow-up pool toy shaped like a flying saucer. The church I grew up in invited me to coffee with the elders and asked me very kindly whether I'd confused a demonic deception with divine revelation. They quoted verse. I quoted nothing. We parted with hugs that were warm and worried. For 2 weeks, I woke to the sound of coyotes and fell asleep to the sound of my own doubt clearing its throat. Every time the doubt got clever, I'd step into the tack room and hold the crystal. Just hold it, not like proof, but like a memory doesn't need anyone else's permission. It steadied me the way a level steadies a carpenter, not by shouting, but by aligning. I started driving farther out, where the radio goes thin and the sky gets fat. I'd pick a fence post and sit until the color changed, thinking about the being's last charge, not to prove, to love. The problem with that instruction is how incredibly specific it turns out to be. Loving an idea is easy. Loving a person who thinks you're unwell is hard labor. So I began small. I fixed Mr. Ramirez's porch step before he asked, left the screws and receipt on the windowsill with a note that said, "Don't pay me, just pay it forward." When a kid outside the hardware store had a flat and no jack, I drove him home and listened to his plan for leaving town without telling him he wouldn't. I called the counselor the sheriff had recommended and said, "I don't think I'm crazy, but I wouldn't mind some help living like I'm not." We talked about grief, not aliens. We talked about how belief changes your posture in the world, how it makes you carry things differently or finally set them down. On Sundays, I sat in the back pew. I didn't look for new doctrine. I looked for old mercy. The playlist of my mind had fewer arguments and more questions. What if God's house has more rooms than we've mapped? What if all the names we use are windows on the same light? What if truth doesn't need a podium, just a person willing to stay? The reporter from Midland showed up eventually, hair perfect, pen quick. "Why do you think it came to you?" she asked, and there it was. The old itch for significance dressed up as curiosity. "I don't," I said. "I think I was the hand closest to the bowl." She frowned, not for the last time. "What do you want people to believe?" "That I'm telling the truth," I said, then surprised us both by shaking my head. "No, that's not it. Believe me or don't. What I want is for people to feel less alone than they did yesterday." She blinked, as if I'd given her a recipe when she'd asked for fireworks. The story she ran was respectful but skeptical. Local veteran claims peaceful contact, speaks of universal Jesus. The comments were the usual weather, hot, cold, sideways. I read fewer of them each day until I didn't read them at all. And gradually, quietly, the edges of my life changed shape. Not the landscape, not my tax bracket, not the way the wind visits in March and leaves everything dusted in want. Just me. The neighbor who used to bug me with his tractor at dawn now got a wave. The stray dog I'd been shooing off for months got a name, Scout, and a bowl. When fear tried to write the story of my day, I told it try a shorter sentence. In town, the laughter softened. Even Earl started asking how I was sleeping, which is a rancher's way of asking how your soul is. Once, in line for coffee, a woman pressed something into my hand. It was a small cross, ugly as sin, glitter glue over cardboard, made by a child. "My daughter said you should have it," she explained, half embarrassed. "She told me, give him this. He saw the big Jesus." I almost corrected her, told her I hadn't seen a bigger Jesus, just a wider grace. But I stopped. I said, "Tell her thank you," and slipped the cross into the same pocket as the crystal. They knocked gently together like two truths not competing. So no, my testimony didn't change the town. It changed the witness, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the first miracle is not that the world believes you. Maybe it's that you finally believe the world can be loved. It happened on a night that asked for nothing, a Tuesday with laundry folded and the sink clean, a moon like a thin coin stuck in the screen of the sky. I fell asleep on the couch, Scout snoring at my boots, the house holding that good kind of quiet that means your ghosts are out walking and not banging on the walls. I didn't ask for a vision, I didn't pray hard, I just closed my eyes and let the dark be dark. The dream arrived without preface. No thunderclap, no tunnel. I was standing in the wash where the trench had been, only now the sand was unscarred, combed smooth like a field before planting. Dawn lived at the edges of everything, a blue that tasted like cool water. When I turned, the being was there. No ship, no wound, just presence. Light moved under its skin the way wind moves wheat, and its eyes held the same old kindness that had unmade me and put me back together. "You kept it," it said, and I realized the crystal was in my palm, humming a note I knew by heart. I nodded. "It steadies me," I answered, surprised to hear my voice as calm as the air. We didn't speak for a time that wasn't quite time. The desert breathed. A hawk wrote a single sentence in the sky and then erased it with its wings. Finally, the being raised its hand, not to touch, just to mark attention, and the dream widened. Not like a curtain opening, more like the horizon remembering it had another side. I saw Earth first, but not the postcard. No blue marble perfection. I saw us as networks of light, each person a small lantern flickering, some bright, some dim, some guttering, and then catching again because another lantern had leaned near. Cities pulsed like heartbeats. Loneliness showed up as pockets of shadow that yielded whenever someone risked kindness. The vision moved, and I saw other worlds, amber seas, pale forests, silver deserts where the wind sang over glass. Different lives, same lanterns. Love is the current, the being said, its voice sounding like a choir heard through a door you haven't yet opened. Fear is the kink in the wire. What about faith? And I asked, where does it live in all this? Faith is what your hands do while your heart remembers, it answered. It builds bridges over old rivers. It keeps the wire straight when storms try to bend it. Images flared, quick, clear, unsentimental. A nurse holding the face of a man who had no one. A boy sharing his sandwich with the class terror. A woman deleting a cruel comment she could have posted and choosing silence over victory. A pastor apologizing. A scientist admitting I don't know and going back to the lab. None of it famous, all of it holy. Is this our future? I asked, greedy for a map. The being shook its head with a tenderness that felt like correction without shame. It is a truth available, it said. Future is a house with doors. You open or close by what you practice. It turned, and I followed its gaze to a darker set of pictures. Rage, harvesting clicks, lies breeding like locusts, hands made into fists because that's easier than reaching. These doors also wait, it said. Not because the maker is cruel, because freedom is real. The wash shifted under my boots, not dangerous, just reminding me I was standing on earth. Tell me what happens to us, I said, and there it was, the old human ache to skip the living and get the ending. The being's reply was not an answer so much as a promise handed back to me. What happens, it said, is what you do, lantern by lantern. The kingdom you pray for is stitched daily, not delivered by freight. Something loosened in my chest, the knot I tie when I want certainty more than truth. And Jesus, I asked, because I am still my mother's son. The being didn't show me a painting or a scene. It let the name ring once, clean, and then filled the silence with meaning. He is the grammar of love, it said, the way it conjugates itself into time. On your world, walking. On others, whispering. In all, yielding power to become presence. He will not end your storms. He will learn your weather and stand in it with you until you are not afraid to build. The dream narrowed to the wash again, to my palm, to the crystal's patient hum. Why me? I asked, finally asking the question everyone else had asked me. You were awake when the signal passed, it said simply, and you were hungry in a way that did not shame you into stealing. It tilted its head, a smile I felt rather than saw. Also, you had a barn. I laughed, a real sound in an unreal place, and the laugh turned to a breath that tasted like morning. The being looked past me, toward a light I couldn't see but could tell was waiting. One more, it said, for your people. It traced a small cross in the air, not an emblem, a gesture, and then a circle around it that widened and widened until it held both of us. The wash, the hawk, the towns I knew, the worlds I didn't. Many shapes, it said. One truth, love that kneels becomes love that lifts. The light rose. The dream thinned. Before it left, the being spoke inside my chest the way it had that first night, soft as a hand on a slammed door. Do not be efficient with mercy, it said. Be extravagant. It is the only arithmetic that multiplies when you spend it. I woke with my cheek against the couch seam and Scout whining gently, as if he'd heard what I had. The house smelled like coffee I hadn't yet made. Outside, the day was ordinary and therefore sacred. I stood, slid the crystal into my pocket and felt it steady. Not proof, not magic, just a reminder that I had doors to choose and lanterns to tend. I am not here to convince you. I am here to witness. A man once carried a stranger to a cot in a barn and discovered the world was wider than his hurt. If you need my ending, it's this. Heaven is near, and love is work, and I'm reporting for duty.